Okay, so the estimate context via Thomas Kramer. Professor Thomas Kramer utilized traditional and new research methods to study the psychology of race. It was growing up in Germany where he was perplexed by how a democratic country could become violently racist in a short period. After relocating to the United States, he employed reaction time measures to explore implicit racial attitudes and published several papers based upon this research. So, implicit by unconscious thoughts that we have of people. So again, watch that full video. Make sure you check this out. It's a pretty underrated video. He hits upon some hard points in that 28 or so minutes that this video runs. And he hits upon some really hard-hitting points. And I think it's important to have people to have a context of why he went with the calculation of his cost of reparations, according to his calculations. Again, a third-party source. So the following chart is from Thomas Kramer. I'm going to zoom out on this so we can see that better. And this was done in 2015. A professor of public policy displaying the 1776 to 1860 value of slave labor in the current dollars. So missing wages, a 12-hour estimate would be 8.46 trillion, and a 6% interest rate compounded to the present 2021 dollars would be 860.2 trillion. My thing about even with interest rates, some of these credit cards for people who have bad credit, again, those interest rates can go up to like 35%. Should the interest rate really be that low? But missing wages of 24-hour estimate. But, for the sake of argument, we'll just go ahead and go with this data. So the missing wages for a 24-hour estimate of missed wages would be 14.2 trillion, or at 6% interest compounded to the present 2021 dollars would be 7 quadrillion. And the asset value of the enslaved, that worth 466.5 billion is what that worth is, and 47.5 trillion would be the 6.6% interest. Expense of self-purchased price of freedom, 559 billion. 6% interest would be 56.9 trillion. Contribution to American economic development. So all the people that benefited, indirectly from slavery. We got a lot of people who say, well, my lineage doesn't have anybody that owned slaves. Yes. Okay. That's interesting, but you may have benefited in some way, right? Either the person that person worked for, or your family members worked for. And then let's say your family members worked for or benefited off of it, and you inherited something indirectly. Okay, so that's a possibility too, but that would be 33.4 billion and 3% interest. 6% interest would be 6.2 trillion. And then we have contribution to American economic development, 72.9 billion at 3%, 105 trillion at 6%. So these are big numbers. You could even say these are modest. And that's from Darity and J.R. Mullen AK, and Slaughter M, 2022. And that's from the cumulative costs of racism and the bill for Black reparations. So the above chart is sourced from a scholarly peer-reviewed academic journal that cost to access. The time of slavery is much older than 1776 to 1860, of course. So the scope of what is to be paid is much larger than what is presented. Okay, let's lowball the $816.2 trillion number at 6% interest compounding. If we divided that by $40 million, we would get 21.05 billion per foundational Black American or descendants of enslaved people. Okay, that's that $860 trillion number at 6% compounding. And the reason why I said $40 million is that represents each foundational Black American that is a descendant of slavery. So, that's how I came up with that conservative estimate. So comparison of the measures of the cost of slavery. So missing wages, a 12-hour estimates, he gives more, those are those estimates. again. And I'm going to continue on. So looking at the above chart on the right-hand side, if you add all the numbers on the right-hand side at 6%, we reach a total of 7,970.90 trillion. The percentages, according to Darity 2022, Kramer uses a 3% interest rate to estimate the bill for the outstanding wages projected up to 2009. Taking the average from compound interest at 3% in column number 1 would be 3.96 trillion. Averaging a total number from the second column of 6%, the average would be 1.328.48 trillion. So let's stay with the higher percentages, considering the small sample size of the estimate is based on the lower end of the scale. So if we divided 1,328 by the total of each foundational Black American in 2021, that would be around 440 million. The total payout for each FBA or African enslaved in the United States would be 33 billion. So remember that Thomas's estimate does not consider the intergenerational or psychological trauma and period after the Civil War, which included over 100 white massacres of American slaves. Okay, Black American slaves. And of course, we're not going to deny that there were Jewish slave owners as well, and there were a small percentage of Black slave owners as well. But again, the exception does not mean that we are to just forget about reparations altogether for those who endured what they endured. It doesn't change the census records. It doesn't change what happened. And that those people were just not paid. So even on the low side, 500 million per person wouldn't be a ridiculous number to throw out there. However, you cannot measure the Holocaust melanated people went through and the ongoing oppression of redlining, gentrification, discrimination, Jim Crow laws, mass incarceration, and the breakup of the family structure. Women had their babies ripped from them physically and, just taken away and sold off. On the low side, if we take the number of Black people, 72% lynched, which is 3,446, according to the NAACP in 2022, 34,460 people were affected if each lynching victim had 10 family members. Okay, so that's how many people, about 34,000 people affected indirectly. You had each lynching victim had about 10 family members, and of course families back in the day, of course, were very large. These are one of the hidden statistics that many people do not acknowledge. We have the Tulsa Race Massacre, which was racial terrorism was what it was, and occurring on May 31st and June 1st, 1921 in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It has been estimated that rioters decimated more than 200 million of Black property in today's dollars. It's probably even more today in 2023. And that source is from the United States Congress. So reparations would be a start in the right direction at the bare minimum. At the bare minimum. To right a wrong. It is America's greatest debt. And it's a debt that when you have debt and you ignore it, it just gets worse. So again, it's something that shouldn't really trigger anger or emotion out of those who oppose it. If you're benefiting, there's no reason it should really even matter to you, because other people that aren't even legally linked to America, like foundational Black Americans, they're getting their handouts. Yeah, they're getting their handouts, and this is reparations is definitely not a handout. So other ideas for reparations. So in the next video, we're going to be going over other ideas for reparations that people have thrown out there.